Hello and welcome to the Newsroom. Breaking this hour, amid the U.S. escalating its military actions against Venezuela, a regional neighbor of the South American country has recently raised its own concerns. Brazilian President Lula da Silva has stated that the U.S. military intervention in Venezuela is nothing short of a humanitarian catastrophe and that may destabilize the regional security. Let's listen in.
Mais de 4 décadas, desde a Guerra das Malvinas, o continente sul-americano volta a ser assombrado pela presença militar de uma potência extra-regional. Os limites do direito internacional estão sendo testados. Uma intervenção armada na Venezuela seria uma catástrofe humanitária para o hemisfério e precedente perigoso para o mundo.
This comes as U.S. President Donald Trump issued a statement earlier this week which ordered a blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva is pressing the European Union to move forward and finalize a long-pending trade agreement with the Mercosur bloc. Speaking at the Mercosur summit in southern Brazil, Lula has stressed that decisive leadership is needed to break the deadlock in negotiations that have stalled for more than 2 decades. He has urged EU leaders to act boldly and deliver the landmark trade pact. Let's listen in.
Europeus pediram mais tempo para discutir medidas adicionais de proteção agrícola. Recebi ontem dos presidentes da Comissão Europeia e do Conselho Europeu carta em que ambos manifestam expectativa de ver o acordo aprovado em janeiro. Sem vontade política e coragem dos dirigentes, não será possível concluir uma negociação que já arrasta por 26 anos. Enquanto isso...
Now we move on. French police officials have shot dead a knife-wielding man who was threatening bystanders and shopkeepers in the Ajaccio city of Corsica Island earlier today. Police officers reported that they had received a call around noon about the armed man, who later left the scene by the time they arrived. He was later found at another location where he was asked to comply with the officers, but he denied. In an attempt to neutralize an armed man, officers used an electrical impulse weapon, but it failed to stop him. The police then opened fire at him. His death, despite the intervention of emergency services. Let's now listen into what the public prosecutor and witness have shared.
Interviennent. Ils remontent en direction de la préfecture, la police cherche à l'interpeller, ils essayent de le maîtriser avec a priori 1 et 2 coups de taser, sans succès. Lorsque l'intéressé continue sa progression, il brandirait un couteau en direction d'un des policiers en le menaçant. Le point dirigé vers ce policier avec le couteau brandi. Donc le deuxième policier présent dans la patrouille de 3 va protéger son collègue et faire usage à 3 reprises de son arme de service, atteignant donc l'intéressé au niveau du thorax. Il décédera des blessures occasionnées par ces tirs. L'autopsie sera mise en œuvre assez rapidement pour confirmer cette hypothèse en tout état de cause. Nous sommes un samedi avant les fêtes, pour Napoléon, il y a beaucoup de monde bien sûr et le trouble à l'ordre public est manifeste. Beaucoup de gens qui sont effectivement choqués, mais aussi beaucoup de témoins de la scène. Donc, on m'a indiqué qu'un certain nombre de vidéos étaient déjà avaient déjà été tournées. Tout ça mérite d'être exploité, vous comprendrez bien, de manière à comprendre le périple de cet individu. Mais je peux écarter à ce stade l'attentat terroriste, puisque à aucun moment l'individu n'aurait proféré des menaces en ce sens.
J'étais tourné, donc j'étais dos à ce qui arrivait de là-bas, donc j'ai pas vu. Mon employé, je vois qu'il arrive à s'échapper, on entend des cris, lui s'échappe, moi j'arrive pas à m'échapper, je suis pris dans les jardinières, dans tout ça. Et là je vois un monsieur avec un couteau qui me passe au-dessus de la tête. Et après bon, j'ai réussi à le pousser un peu, et puis après en allant là-bas, il y a un monsieur qui l'a pris à coup de chaise, il est tombé par terre, puis après il s'est fait abattre.
Now we move on to our next news. Police officials have reported that the two shooters, Sajid Akram and his son Naveed, who carried out the Bondi beach shooting in Australia, visited the southern island of Mindanao in the Philippines earlier and stayed there briefly for a month. The father and son duo had put up at the Davao City's GV Hotel, and as per the staff, they only left each morning. Officials have added that one of the shooters also visited a gun store during their stay. Moreover, an Australian counter-terrorism team investigating the case has claimed that the two shooters also met with Islamic extremists during their Philippines stay. Now, Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has criticized media reports, saying that they have misleadingly portrayed the country as, quote, a training cis hotspot for terrorism. Meanwhile, reports have emerged saying that Sajid Akram, the father of who was shot dead at the scene last week by the police, had reportedly studied at an Anwarul Ulum College in Indian city of Hyderabad. The college staff and students have condemned the shooting incident, distancing themselves from the suspects. Let's listen in.
I was deeply hurt and saddened by this kind of incident because we believe in humanity. We teach here human values, and it was extremely disturbing that one bad fish has spoiled the name of the Hyderabad, Telangana, and India, and our community.
बहुत बुरा लगता है हमारे कॉलेज का जो था स्टूडेंट वो आके अब ऐसा हमारा रेपुटेशन ख़राब हो जाता उसी से और अब हम लोग को अब उसका छुपाना पड़ेगा अच्छा नहीं लगेगा उसके बारे में ऐसा हमारे कॉलेज का ही स्टूडेंट ऐसा कराया बोले तो हमारा कॉलेज का नाम रोशन करने की जगह वो बदनाम कर चुका.
Now we move on to US. The US Justice Department has released thousands of heavily redacted documents linked to the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The newly released files make scant reference to US President Donald Trump, but they extensively feature Democratic former President Bill Clinton. The partial release follows a law passed by Congress in November, forcing disclosure of Epstein-related material despite months of resistance from the Trump administration. Many of the documents are almost entirely blacked out, with some running more than 100 pages of censored text. The Justice Department admits it is still reviewing hundreds of thousands of additional pages. While Trump's name does not appear in the latest batch, earlier disclosures showed his name listed on flight manifests for Jeffrey Epstein's private jet. Those records indicated passengers who traveled on Epstein's aircraft, often referred to as the Lolita Express. Trump has denied any wrongdoing, and the White House earlier has said that Trump served severe ties with Epstein years before his first conviction in 2008. Lawmakers from both parties are now criticizing the Justice Department, saying that the release falls short of the law's transparency requirements. Now we move on to our next news. Taiwan's president has visited victims of the deadly stabbing attack in Taipei. President Lai Ching-te went to a hospital to meet the injured and families of those killed. 3 civilians have died in a knife rampage in a busy shopping district. The attacker later died during a police chase, taking the death toll to 4. Police say the suspect acted alone and had a criminal record and outstanding warrants. Authorities are now probing his background and motive. Lai has ordered a full investigation. Let's listen in.
昨天晚上发生在北基以及北捷中山站周边这一起害人的有计划的暴力攻击事件，已经造成3位民众加上歹徒共4人死亡，也造成11名民众轻重伤。我们都应该要更谨慎、更积极的来建立一套制度。一旦接获电话，一旦接获讯息，快速部队一定要迅速赶到，而且要有能力制止这种攻击行为。 而且我们要提升到不单纯是治安的快速打击部队，要把它往反恐的简历的布置、训练这个制度上方面来建设，才有办法保护台湾社会安定跟民众的安全。
嫌犯在北捷一直到中山站那这个1个小时的时间，那我们从这个监录影系统的这个侦查里面发现，嫌犯是有回到这个旅馆的住处发生了这个案件的时候，第一时间还没办法确认这个嫌犯的一个身份所以他这个逃逸的时间，我们是在1个小时之后才确认这个身份。那未来我们对于这个状况，我们也是以这个作为案例，未来会做勤务更精致的一个部署。
其实我当下没有什么感觉，就是中山站发生了伤人的事件，可是我一到现场看到有人真的坐在那里，然后正在进行伤口的包扎，那甚至还有其他的伤患从里面被抬出来的时候，我那时候才觉得真的蛮可怕的。然后，而且这个情况一定非常严重，一定不止几个人受伤而已。为什么没有第一时间掌握到嫌犯的行踪？那导致他后来还有在台北车站释放烟雾弹，然后又跑到中山站去随机伤人的事件。所以我觉得警方的螺丝其实也要再拴紧一点啦。那其实如果是以一般民众的想法的话，当然会觉得非常的有点恐慌啦。毕竟如果是自己的家人。
Now we move on to Europe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that the United States has proposed a new round of talks in Miami involving Ukrainian and Russian delegations. The discussions aim to advance efforts to end the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. European representatives may also participate in the negotiations. Depending on the outcomes of previous meetings held in Miami, officials have emphasized that the format and schedule of the talks are still being finalized as both sides work towards potential agreements and steps into de-escalating the tensions. Let's listen in.
Дійсно, Сполучені Штати Америки сказали, що у них буде окрема зустріч з представниками Росії, і вони запропонували такий формат, наскільки я розумію, Україна, Америка, русські, ну так як там.
Now we move on. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky rejects any Russian influence over Ukraine's upcoming elections. He has stressed that Moscow will not determine the timing or format of the vote, which will proceed under Ukrainian law. Zelensky has confirmed that citizens in territories under Russian control will not participate, ensuring the election remains fair and transparent for Ukrainians living under government authority. The statement underscores Ukraine's commitment to holding independent presidential elections despite ongoing tensions with Russia. Let's listen in.
Все-таки не Путіну вирішувати, коли, в якому форматі будуть проходити вибори в Україні, бо це вибори виключно українські, народу України, громадян України. Він точно не громадянин України, тому він точно не буде впливати ні на що і не на результат. Тим більше, що стосується, хто голосує. Голосують громадяни України, які знаходяться в Україні, на контрольованій українцями території. Тому що тут можемо забезпечити ми чесні, прозорі вибори.
Now Russia has intensified air and drone strikes on Ukraine's Black Sea coast, targeting the port of Pivdeny and other sites in the Odessa region. Ukrainian officials say Saturday's attack has damaged fuel reservoirs, coming a day after a missile strike on the port killed 8 people and injured more than 30. Russian forces also targeted a key bridge over the Dniester estuary near the Moldova border, disrupting a vital transport route. Ukraine accuses Moscow of trying to cut the country off from the Black Sea and terrorize civilians. Ukrainian authorities say passengers were temporarily rerouted, including by water crossings. Here's what an Ukrainian soldiers fighting in Donetsk has shared.
просто все залишили так. Я думаю, це безсмислено. Чому? Тому що стільки ми четвертий рік вже почти стоїмо. І взяти все глупо, так все кинути, стільки хлопців потеряли. Це безсмислено. Я не бачу смислу взяти це все кинути.
Now we stay in the region. In a new defense strategic development, Ukraine and Portugal has agreed on a joint production of Ukrainian sea drones. Alexander Kamyshin, the Ukrainian president's aide, has shared a brief post on X, which says that Ukraine's unmanned surface vehicles have proven to be a strong line of deterrence against Russian warships and submarines. Now, by means of the collaboration, Ukraine would help Portugal defend Europe as Portugal's entire coastline faces the North Atlantic Ocean and guards key maritime approaches in Europe. This comes as reports of Russia attacking the southern Ukrainian port of Pivdeni emerge. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia has ramped up its strike on the Odessa region, which is located along the Black Sea and hosts several ports that are critical to Ukraine's foreign trade and fuel supplies operations. Let's listen in.
Сьогодні є спільна, важлива дуже спільна заява України та Португалії. Щойно ми підписали її про встановлення партнерства для виробництва морських дронів. Це один з найбільш перспективних напрямів в оборонній роботі зараз. Важливо, щоб були результати. І в усіх частинах нашої Європи має бути достатньо сили, щоб протидіяти будь-яким загрозам. І сучасні дрони – це реальний інструмент захисту.
Que hoje tem também outro reforço, que foi o acordo que celebramos para a produção conjunta de drones subaquáticos, que são particularmente importantes no caso da Ucrânia e também no caso de Portugal. Ele permitirá levar ainda mais longe o conhecimento, a experiência que temos, o know-how, a nossa competência tecnológica para podermos defender o nosso espaço marítimo, podermos defender as nossas infraestruturas críticas e, quando digo as nossas, não são apenas as portuguesas e ucranianas, são aquelas que nós defendemos a bem do nosso espaço europeu.
Now we move on. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced sweeping agreements with 9 major pharmaceutical companies aimed at sharply lowering prescription drug prices in the United States. It has been stated that the long-standing gap between U.S. drug prices and global rates is set to be narrowed significantly, while new drugs are to follow most favored nation pricing across all markets. Additional measures include direct consumer sales through a new Trump RX platform, deep discounts on selected drugs, and expanded U.S. manufacturing, with companies receiving temporary tariff exemptions in return. Let's listen in.
Starting next year, American drug prices will come down fast and furious, and will soon be among the lowest in the developed world. So in other words, whatever the lowest price for a certain drug, of which these companies make much of it, whatever the lowest price is, that price will come down to that price. So we will get the lowest price anywhere in the world. If they're lower in England than they are in Germany, we take the England price. I'm going to call a meeting. It could be in Florida this coming week, or it could be back in the White House the first week, not the second or third week. I'm going to call a meeting of the big insurance companies that have gotten so rich by receiving money and really much far more money than they're entitled to. And I have a feeling maybe if they would act like these incredible, brilliant, responsible citizens behind me, people that love our country, and they love the world. I mean, frankly, these are international companies for the most part. I'm going to call a meeting of the insurance companies. I'm going to see if they get their price down, to put it very bluntly.
Now we move on. Jordan's Air Force has carried out strikes against Islamic State targets in southern Syria as part of a U.S.-led overnight operation. The Jordanian military said the strikes aim to prevent extremist groups from using these areas as bases to threaten neighboring countries. The action reflects coordination with international partners to maintain security in the region. According to the Pentagon, U.S. fighter jets attacked helicopters and artillery, struck more than 70 Islamic State targets across central Syria. Officials said the strikes were carefully planned and aimed at degrading the group's operational capabilities in the region. Admiral Brett Cooper has said the United States would continue to relentlessly pursue terrorists who seek to harm Americans and U.S. partners. President Donald Trump described these strikes as very serious retaliation. The Pentagon has emphasized that the operation was defensive in nature and intended to prevent future attacks on U.S. forces, as U.S. forces remain on high alert across the region. Now we move on to our next news. Palestinians has held funerals in Gaza for 5 people who were killed in what local officials say was an Israeli strike on a school sheltering displaced families. Health and emergency services say most of the dead were children and that bodies were recovered only after in coordination with Israel. The Israeli military says its troops fired at what it called suspicious individuals and is reviewing reports of casualties. Hamas has called the attack violations of the ceasefire. Palestinian officials say 400 people have been killed since the truce began, while Israel says 3 of its soldiers have died. Let's listen in.
احنا بقينا قاعدين في قلب المدرسة تمام منطقة آمنة ما درينا الا هالصواريخ وهالقذائف بتسقط علينا طب وضرب في الناس المدنيين الأبرياء مجزرة جديدة ناس أبرياء مدنيين أطفال نساء كبار صغار كلهم 3 سنين 5 سنين يعني لا لهم دخل لا في تنظيم ولا في أي حاجة.
صار الانفجار واحنا في الحفل الزفاف قاعدين فللأسف الشديد صرنا نلم أشلاء أطفال شيوخ رضع نساء شباب للأسف الشديد رننا على طواقم الدفاع المدني طواقم الإسعاف للأسف الشديد ما قدروش يعدوا من الجيش الدفاع.
Now we move on. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that announcements related to the Muslim Brotherhood could come as early as next week. Speaking to reporters, Rubio said the process of designating groups involves multiple internal steps, including the meeting legal criteria, gathering information, and completing formal reviews. He has stressed that these procedures take time despite public expectations of quick actions. When asked about the potential pushback from Qatar, Rubio has declined to comment, noting the Muslim Brotherhood operates through different chapters worldwide. Let's listen in.
I think we'll have some announcements, if not today, early next week on Muslim Brotherhood. Designating groups there's a series of internal steps, despite what people may or may not perceive. There are things we have to meet, criteria we have to meet, information we have to have, boxes we have to check, legal reviews that have to happen, and that takes time. So, but I think there'll be announcements very soon on that. Probably as early, if not today, early this next week.
Do you expect pushback from the Qataris?
Well, I'm not going to comment on which segments of the Muslim Brotherhood. As you know, there are different chapters, for lack of a better term, and individuals spread throughout the world. But the president's issued his executive order, and we're working through the execution of it. And we'll get to what we need to get to. A lot of this obviously depends, from a legal review standpoint. You have to have certain information that you can cite in order to justify the designation. So we're working through that. We'll have some announcements next week, and they won't be the last one's announcement.
Tens of thousands of Bangladeshi mourners, including the country's interim government leader, are attending the funeral of a slain youth leader and election candidate amid tight security. 32-year-old Sharif Osman Hadi, a key figure in last year's student-led uprising that toppled longtime Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, was shot in the head by masked assailants in Dhaka last week while launching his campaign for an election due in February. He died on Thursday in Singapore after 6 days on life support. The death of the youth leader prompted a wave of unrest in the South Asian nation that included coordinated mob attacks on major newspapers and cultural institutions. Police and paramilitary forces were deployed across the capital for the funeral of the leader, but there were no reports of any renewed violence. Let's listen to what the mourners have shared.
আমরা আজকে হাদি ভাইয়ের জানাজা এসেছিলাম এবং হাদি ভাইয়ের সেসব কথাগুলা অতীতের কাজগুলো যেগুলো করে গেছে এখন গত হয়ে গেছে সেগুলো আমরা মনে প্রাণে অন্তরে ধারণ করে সেগুলো ভেবে তার জানাজা অংশগ্রহণ করেছিলাম এবং শপথ নিয়েছি যে আমরা হাদি ভাই যে অপূর্ণ কাজগুলো রয়ে গেছে ইনশাল্লাহ আমরা সেগুলো পূর্ণ করার চেষ্টা করব আমাদের জান দিয়ে হলে ইনশাল্লাহ চেষ্টা করব আর আমাদের দেশের সার্বভৌমত্ব রক্ষার জন্য আমাদের জান আমার যত রক্ত লাগে আমরা ইনশাল্লাহ দেব।
আমরা নরসিংদী থেকে এই জায়গার মধ্যে এসেছি এবং আল্লাহ তাআলার কাছে আমরা এই দোয়া প্রার্থনা করি হাদি ভাই যেন আল্লাহ তাআলা যেন ওনাকে জান্নাতের উঁচু মাকাম দান করেন এবং উনিকে যে খুনিরা মানে হত্যা করছে এই খুনিদের যেন দৃষ্টান্তমূলক শাস্তি হয় এটা আমাদের সরকারের কাছে আকুল আবেদন থাকবে এবং স্বরাষ্ট্রমন্ত্রী এবং আইনমন্ত্রীর।
With that, it's a wrap on the newsroom. Keep watching NewsX World for more breaking updates.